Crichton, Matto, Lolo, Tino? Which one do we want? Welcome guys, in today's video we're going to be talking about the best second row options to put into your SuperCoach squads. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so similar to what I've done previously with the hookers and the front row forwards, I'm going to be taking you through the second row options that I think are going to be the best choices to be putting into our teams to start the year and even throughout the rest of the season as well. Now the second row is one of the toughest positions I think because there's such solid depth. There's so many good options that we can choose. So hopefully looking at kind of like the different stats and the potential minutes of these players, we'll be able to come to a good conclusion as to which ones are the best options. So we'll start off by looking at the gun players, and as you can see there's a really good selection that I've put together here. Starting off, I think Angus, Crichton and Ryan Matterson, who I've got as the first two, I think are absolute must-haves. I think they're both going to be really good options. They're both edge forwards who are likely to play 80 minutes for their teams respectively. And as you can see, they've got really, decent PPMs. Crichton a little bit better than Matterson, but what they both have works in their favour is the percentage of their points which comes from base and the rest that comes from attacking points. As you can see, they were both averaging in the mid 70s, and that's with the base percentage of like 72 and 74%, which actually shows that they have got other ways of getting points, mainly with offloads and potential tries and line breaks. We can see Ryan Matterson for the right side of the Eels is really important to their attack, as is Crichton is to the left side of the Roosters attack, which is generally their favoured side. So I think either of these two, you can't really go too wrong. I think Crichton especially becomes a really good option given that Boyd Cordner is going to be missing the first 12 rounds of the season, always predicted to at least, given his concussion history. And that means that Crichton will have to take up more workload, and he's already guaranteed to be playing at close to 70-80 minutes a game anyway. So I think in a good Roosters team, they've got a bit of a tough-ish start to the season. They've got some difficult opponents in there. But I think, with guys like with forwards, it's not as important as the opponent. You just want to be making sure that they've got a good PPM, minutes are high. So I think, I think he ticks all those boxes, and I think, yes, he is the most expensive second row, obviously excluding McInnes, but McInnes is gone for the season, so we can't really consider him. But I think at 670k, I think he's worth the money, and I think you can see, obviously, he's owned by about 20% of the game at the moment, so I think, obviously, a lot of coaches are thinking the same. I think you can lock him into your starting squad, don't have to think about him, set and forget. I think he's a really solid option, and I'd echo the same thing with Ryan Matterson as well. I think there's only a 5k difference between the two, so if you're really tight on money, you could just maybe go Matterson instead of Crichton. I think either of these two options, you can't really go too wrong. Matterson does have good games to start the season as well, so if you do think that his attacking potential is going to be there, then I think that might sway Matterson in your favour instead of Crichton. Personally, of the two, I've gone Crichton at the moment, but I think you could honestly flip a coin between the two and you'll be fine. Next, we've got Taumalolo at 640k. Obviously, Taumalolo, he doesn't really need any kind of introduction for SuperCoach. He's an absolute gun. His average was 72, and his, really good PPM of 1.18. Like, there's no need to kind of, we know what his potential is going to be. The question with Taumalolo, though, is that Todd Payton has come out and said he's going to be looking to use Taumalolo back in that kind of 49 to 50 minute mark, as opposed to the previous seasons where he's been playing around the 60 minute mark. Now, we kind of have to see how that's going to affect his potential points. Now, the way I see it is that he's already such a good worker, and I think even if he goes to 50 minutes instead of the 60, his PPM might actually increase then a little bit to say a 1.25 maybe. And so I think even if he is playing 50 minutes, he's still going to be giving you like 60 to 65 points as well, as opposed to say the 70. So I don't think the drop off is actually going to be that much. I know a lot of people have been kind of put off by the minutes, and I can understand that because, we just don't know if his PPM is going to be, if it's going to stay the same or if it's going to improve. As you can see, obviously most of his points come from base, just from tackles and run meters. So he doesn't really have as much potential to be getting tries and stuff like the likes of Crichton or Matterson. But I think obviously Taumalolo is a set forget option. You know what you're going to get. He's got the pedigree. So I think there's still nothing really wrong with going for him. But, if you're really going to be put off by that potential drop off in minutes, then I think there potentially are other options that you could look at. I think paying the extra 20k for Matterson and Crichton, who are more guaranteed to play 80, could be a safe bet. But I still haven't decided yet how I'm going to look at Taumalolo. I think I might do a bit of a wait and see how his kind of maybe the first 2 or 3 games, what his minutes are like. Potentially, he might drop in price if his average is a little bit lower, and you could then pick him up at a cheaper price. That could be a potential way to get Taumalolo in your team if you're not comfortable with him at the start of the year. Tohu Harris, I think, is a really interesting option at 613k. He's going to be saving you some money compared to the three that I've just mentioned, and he's way less owned, 7%. He's always a pod option. So every single season, he's just never selected, and I think it's just because he's just not a very flashy player. You can see that his base percentage it's 91% of his points from base. He just rolls up his sleeves, tackles, runs meters, occasionally offloads as well. But he's really consistent, solid option. I think for someone like me, I'm a little bit more risk averse, so I think I don't mind having someone like Tohu Harris to start the season, because I just know I'm going to get from him 70 points a game. It's not going to really drift too far from that. So I think it's really good to just know you can have some kind of a guarantee, I think, in your second row. I think I am potentially maybe looking at having him as one of my second row starters. Obviously, they have got two new forwards in Adam Fanua-Blake and Ben Murdoch-Masila. But I think Tohu Harris last season, even with the introduction back of Tavanga when he came back into the side, didn't really impact Tohu Harris's minutes that much. But maybe something to keep a lookout on. But he was averaging 76 a game. I wouldn't expect him to be any less than, say, 70 a game. So, even at that PPM, he might be getting about the 65 point mark. I wouldn't really think if there's going to be too much upside with him. But, really consistent option. I think one that's good if you want to try to go the pod, point of difference route as well. Moving on to Patrick Carrigan. Again, Carrigan and Tohu Harris, I think you can kind of consider them together as, pod options who have got little upside, but very, very consistent. Especially Carrigan, he came out last year and he was super popular, obviously, because he was cheap to start the season. But I think with the lack of Payne Haas in the first 3 games for the Broncos, Carrigan might be playing 80 minutes again. And I think if he's playing 80 minutes with that PPM of about 1, I wouldn't say he scored 80 every game, but, you can expect, the high 60s, low 70s, I think, which I think is obviously really solid. And I think he's gone a lot under the radar this year. Maybe not, sorry. Under the radar is probably not the right way. I think everyone knows of him and his pedigree. I think because he was cheap last year, he was popular. But this season, people are going to be looking elsewhere, which I can kind of understand. But, I think he's not getting as much love as I think he should, because he is a really, really consistent option. He's got a good PPM, good base stats, he's low owned, and he's cheaper than some of the other guys as well. If Tohu Harris and him are quite similar, you could save, like $20,000 going from Carrigan instead of Tohu Harris. And I think with the lack of Payne Haas, I expect his minutes to be up as well at the start of the year. So I think he is a really good option. Moving on to Trbojevic, I think he's never one that's really appealed to me, because yes, the one thing from him is that he's guaranteed to play 80 minutes like every single game. He's so important to that Manly side. But I think for me, just he doesn't have as much upside, say, as some of the other second row. And obviously, while Tohu Harris and Carrigan don't have the upside, they do have a higher PPN than him. So that at least in their minutes, they're going to be getting a little bit more output than you would say from the likes of Trbojevic. He does sometimes have some attacking threat. He sometimes, because he does get involved in the link-up play. But really, with second row forwards, we're mainly looking at them for their workload. And I just don't think he provides as much as, say, the other two. I think obviously his average is close, but he did have some games last season where I think he scored like 1 or 2 tries, and that really kind of inflated his numbers. Like, I think what you'll get with Trbojevic is that you'll get like 50 to 60 points in base every game, but not much else. Maybe occasionally an offload. So for that reason, I think he's not as high on my kind of second row forward list as the other 4 or 5 that I mentioned before. But I can see why he's a bit more popular than the likes of Tohu Harris and Carrigan, because he is a bit more of a well-known player, and he is a very good real-life player, don't get me wrong. In SuperCoach, though, I feel like sometimes he's just not as good as we would hope so. So me, I wouldn't call him an avoid, but maybe just consider that he just doesn't have as much upside. And his base stats aren't quite as strong as the likes of, say, Tohu Harris or Carrigan. Moving on, so I'll talk about Fifita and Kikau kind of together. So obviously Fifita is about 570k and Kikau is about 540. Now for me, like, obviously Fifita is going to be super popular. Right? The thing with Fifita and Kikau is that their base stats percentage is just not very high. You can see that 60% and 53% respectively, which just means their scores are very inconsistent, and they really rely on getting tries and that kind of thing to get high points. And I think, yes, they do have the potential to get those tries, but it's harder to predict getting tries as it is to, say, someone like Crichton, who I know is just going to be getting mid-70s just from his workload and occasionally chipping in with some attacking points as well. So I think that's something to keep in mind with Fifita and Kikau, and personally for me, I just don't think I'm going to be going there at least to start the season. I guess Kikau, the Panthers do have good games to start the year, so the potential for tries is there. But I think as a long-term option, these two, their PPMs are just a little bit lower compared to the first 5 second row forwards that I've got here. So I think for that reason, I'm not really going to be going there. The reason I kind of threw Kikau into this list is that because I saw he was 8% owned, so obviously he's getting some interest from players, but I think personally for me, I just don't think I'm going to be going there. So for these two, I think definitely something to keep in the back of your mind, that the upside for them is there, but they can be a little bit more inconsistent. So, you can get frustrated sometimes where weeks they might just score 30 to 40 points. So one player I haven't mentioned who I've got on this list as well is Mitch Barnett. He's at a similar price to Viliame Kikau, and I think he could actually probably be a better option than Kikau. I think, his similar price is, the Knights have got a good start to the season in terms of their draw, and his base stats a bit more comparable to the likes of, say, Tohu Harris at about 0.9. And I think he's probably going to be expected to play high minutes, to start the season. I think the Knights are going to be missing, I think Lachlan Fitzgibbon potentially is missing the first 4 rounds of the season. Obviously, the Knights are getting Frizzell, which is another forward who might be taking up, minutes and workload from him. But I think at 540k, at similar price to Kikau, I'd be picking Barnett all day long. But the reason I just wanted to put Kikau on this list is that I can see he's higher owned than Barnett, so I would kind of just flag that. For me, Kikau is an avoid, whereas Barnett I think is a good consideration if you want a cheaper pod, maybe your third, second row slot. So moving on to the mid-ranges, so I've got 3 here. I've got Jackson Ford, Tom Gilbert and Andrew Davey. I'll quickly just touch on Tom Gilbert. So he was flagged to be potentially in the starting second row for the Cowboys. However, in the off-season, he has got an injury until he was out for 6 to 8 weeks. But he's just someone to keep an eye on at 340k. He was initially my very first team draft. But given the injury, obviously I had to take him out. But he could be a good one to look at just in case, he comes back into the fold, say, mid-season. And, you're looking to kind of get onto a cash cow in the middle of the season. He could be a potential option. And he had a good PPM as well. So I'll quickly touch on Jackson Ford here. So in the games that he started last season with the Dragons, he was averaging about 50 points in base, and he is predicted to be in the starting second row for the Dragons to begin the year. So I think he's priced at about an average of 41 points. So if he is starting and he's going to be getting the same amount of points as he did in those 2 games that he did last season, he'd be averaging more than what he's priced at, and so he could make a little bit of money. He's got a decent PPM. His points are mainly coming all from base stats. So I think he could be a decent option if you're looking for a kind of mid-range second row forward option. But personally, I think if I had to pick one of them, it would be Andrew Davey. He's cheaper by about $30,000. And he's, I think, almost guaranteed to be in the starting second row for the Sea Eagles, who he plays for now. And he had a good PPM. And in the 2 games that he started for the Eels, he was also getting base of about 50 to 60 points. So, I think if he's playing 80 minutes for the Sea Eagles on an edge, I'd expect him to be getting about 50-60 points as well above his average points or what he's priced at. So I think he's a very, very good cash cow option to have in your second row. So I think he's he's perfect, I think, for that 4th second row slot on your bench, who you can actually have in your starting 17 as a reserve as well. So I think Andrew Davey is the pick of the mid-range options, and he's cheaper than Jackson Ford as well. So I'll definitely be going for him. I think he's a must-have in your second row forwards. Now, I'll just quickly touch on some exclusions that I've got there. So Jai Arrow, Radley, and Corey Hawiranira are players who I've seen are very popular, even more so than these other 3 that I've mentioned. Jai Arrow for me is just an avoid. I think at 475k he's just a lot more expensive than these other guys, and his PPM has just been on the decline in the past few seasons. And with Jai Arrow, the Rabbitohs have got a really strong forward pack as well, so I expect minutes and workload to be shared. So I just think he's just not going to be an option for me for SuperCoach. I had him to start the season last year and I really regretted it. Radley I've got there at 446k, sorry. So he does have some advantage of being dual listed in either the hooker or second row forward position, but he's just come back from a long-term injury. I think he's going to be eased back into the Roosters squad, so he's not going to be guaranteed, I think, to be playing 80 minutes from the start of the season. So I think at that price it's too much of a it's just too much to be spending on someone we're just not quite sure what the minutes is going to be initially. Obviously, I think as he gets to full fitness, he'll be playing 80 minutes again, and then that might be a good time to pick him up when his price has gone down. But to start the season, I think Radley is not someone for me. And Harry Onaira, I think, actually was very popular, I think, to start the season. At 300k, he might have been one of the starting forwards for the Raiders. but given his off-field dramas, I don't know if he's going to be relegated from the starting lineup and in the 17 or out of the squad altogether. Potentially that means some suspensions could be coming his way as well. So I think for him, it's a wait and see on kind of, Teamless Tuesday before the first round of the season. And if, there's any more comments from Ricky Stewart about what his role is going to be moving forward in the team. If we think he's going to be playing, not even on the bench a little bit, I think he could be a decent option to make some money. But for now, I think maybe just don't have him in your starting squad. All right, finally, we're moving on to the second row forward, Cheapies. Now, this year is a really good year for cheap second row forward options. So I think, there's definitely going to be some players who are absolute must-haves, in my opinion, in this category. Jordan Riki, number one. I think he played really, really well in the Indigenous All-Stars game. He looked really impressive. 278k, very cheap option. And if we see in the round one team list that he's starting for the Broncos, 100%, get him into your team, because especially with the loss of Payne Haas, as I mentioned, the Broncos forwards are going to have to step up, and he just looks really threatening as well from the attacking plays. He could potentially kind of do what Fifita was doing for the Broncos, be that attacking edge forward. And obviously his stats aren't like spectacular, but I think when he's that cheap and he's going to be playing minutes, that he's going to be getting points and he's going to make us some money. So 100% get Jordan Riki into your team if he's going to be starting for the Broncos. Similarly with Asiata as well, so he is actually also listed in the front row forward, so that does give him some flexibility too if you wanted to put him into one of your front row slots instead. But yeah, similar to what I said for Riki, I think Asiata is more likely to be starting from the bench as opposed to in the starting 13. But at 250k, he does have good stats. He was averaging close to 1 point per minute in the 30 or so minutes that he was playing last season. I'd expect his role to be maybe similar to that, potentially up to 40 minutes. And then he would be making us some money as well. So I think Asiata, not as essential as, say, Jordan Riki, but I think very, very good option to have in that cheap category for second row forward. Shawn Blore, unfortunately, he's just got an injury. It was confirmed in the, I think it was the Billy Walters podcast, that he's done something. I think he's broken his wrist. And so I think he's expected to at least miss the first 1 to 2 rounds of the season, which is really a shame because he was really popular, cheapie option, as you can see. He was expected to be starting for the Tigers. So I think with him, the best strategy that I'm going to probably adopt is that I'll take him out of my whole 25 squad, but just keep him in the back of your mind that when he does return, it will still take 3 games before he actually changes price. So we do have quite a long time to see him play before we actually have to just get him straight into our team. So for that's the reason why I wouldn't say have him in your first 25, because there'll be a long time that he'll be sitting in your team, not adding anything in terms of cash cow potential or even points to justify him being in your starting 25. I think just wait for him to come back into the team, see how he performs, and then you can just get him in on his 3rd game just before he increases in price. So I think which is a shame, because I think he was just nailed on in a lot of people's teams as another second row cheap option. But yeah, so for him, it would be a wait and see, because he has good stats. I remember last season when he was, it's not really stats related, but him and Nathan Brown getting into it, a bit of a scuffle, love to see it. So I think just for that, I'd buy him alone just for that. But unfortunately that he's injured, but yeah, definitely someone who's a wait and see for now. But when he plays, get him into your team. And finally, I've got Zac Saddler here. So to be honest, him, I don't actually think he's going to be playing until at least halfway through the season, because I think he's on a development contract with the Sea Eagles. Obviously, he did feature in the Indigenous All-Stars game. But yeah, so for him, obviously he's bottom dollar. I wouldn't get him into your starting 25, given that he's just not going to be adding anything to your team. But he's one of those players similar to Blore. I think if he does eventually pop up somewhere during the season, and you just need to make some, if you just need to save money and downgrade a player to a cheap 173k player who might play, I think Saddler could be the guy that you're looking for. But definitely not someone to have, I think, in your starting 25, because he's just not going to be playing for us. Alright guys, well that's it. We've made it to the end of the video. We've gone through all the best second row options that I think you guys should be considering when you're building your SuperCoach squads. I'm definitely interested, leave in the comments below, the players that you think that I might have left out that you think could also be valid considerations. Because the thing with the second row this year especially, I find, is that there's a lot of good depth. There's so many different players that I think are going to be good options. Obviously I couldn't talk about all of them, but yeah, so I'm really keen to see what you guys think as well. If you want to leave those those suggestions in the comments as well, and if you guys found value out of the video, would really appreciate a thumbs up, and definitely subscribe as well, because I'll be putting out more videos up until the start of the season and throughout the season as well. But until then, see you guys in the next one.